The car was never the real question. The real question was why some people believed she could not possibly own it. In the quiet streets of Willow Creek, Texas, a silver Rolls-Royce sat in a driveway on a warm Saturday morning, shining under the bright sunlight. To most people passing by, it was simply a luxury vehicle, a symbol of success, a machine worth admiring. But to one neighbor watching from across the street, it became something else. It became a question he answered before he ever knew the truth. Richard Caldwell had lived in Willow Creek for more than 20 years. He knew every street, every corner, and many of the people who called the neighborhood home. He believed he understood what belonged and what seemed unusual. That belief had always made him feel confident. But confidence can become dangerous when it moves faster than understanding. That morning, Richard noticed a black woman standing beside the Rolls-Royce parked near a beautiful two-story home. Her name was Monica Hayes, although Richard did not know that yet. He did not know about her career, her years of dedication, or the journey that brought her to that moment. He only saw what was in front of him, a woman he did not recognize, a luxury vehicle, a situation he decided needed an explanation. Monica, meanwhile, was simply preparing for her day. She had spent years building a successful career as a corporate attorney, working long hours and making difficult decisions. The vehicle was not a mystery to her. It was something she had earned through years of commitment and hard work. To Monica, the Rolls-Royce was not a statement. It was simply her car. But from Richard's perspective, the story looked different because he only knew the small piece he could see. He watched as Monica calmly checked a few things before heading inside. There was no argument, no confusion, no sign that anything was wrong. Yet the question in Richard's mind continued to grow. How could someone like her own a vehicle like that? It was a question built on assumption, not evidence. And that was the moment the story truly began. Because sometimes the biggest misunderstandings do not start with what people know. They start with what people think they know. Richard did not realize that the answer to his question was already standing right in front of him. He did not realize that the woman he was quietly judging had a story far more impressive than the vehicle beside her. He did not realize that the truth was waiting in a simple document that would eventually change the entire situation. For now, all he had was a conclusion, and Monica had something much stronger. She had the truth. The morning continued quietly in Willow Creek, but the assumptions had already begun. A single glance had created a story that would soon be challenged by facts. And when that moment arrived, everyone watching would learn an important lesson. People are often more than what others expect them to be. The most dangerous assumptions are often the ones people never stop to question. In Willow Creek, Texas, Richard Caldwell believed he was simply paying attention to his neighborhood. He believed he was noticing something unusual and doing what any concerned resident would do. But what he did not realize was that the story he created in his mind was built on only a few seconds of observation. And a few seconds are rarely enough to understand a person's entire life. After seeing Monica Hayes beside the silver Rolls-Royce, Richard continued watching from a distance. He noticed the way she carried herself, the way she moved calmly through the morning, and the way she appeared completely comfortable beside the vehicle. But instead of seeing confidence, he interpreted it through the assumptions he had already created. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became that something did not seem right. Richard never stopped to ask Monica a simple question. He never introduced himself. He never asked about the vehicle. He never gave her the opportunity to share the truth. The story had already been written in his mind before the first conversation ever happened. Across the street, Monica remained unaware of the thoughts surrounding her. She was focused on her own plans for the day. Her career had taught her the importance of patience, preparation, and allowing facts to guide decisions. As a corporate attorney, she spent her professional life examining details before reaching conclusions. She understood that a complete picture required more than a quick impression. But Richard was doing the opposite. He was filling in the missing pieces with assumptions. Later that morning, Richard spoke with another neighbor about what he had seen. The conversation was not based on facts. It was based on uncertainty. The Rolls-Royce became the center of attention, but the person beside it became the subject of judgment. Nobody asked who Monica was. Nobody asked about her story. Nobody considered that there could be an explanation they had not imagined. The situation became a reminder of how quickly people can create a version of reality that feels true simply because they believe it. Richard had no evidence that anything was wrong. He only had a feeling, and feelings, without facts, can sometimes lead people in the wrong direction. As the day continued, Monica prepared to leave the neighborhood for her next appointment. She had no idea that a simple moment beside her own vehicle had caused questions among people who did not know her. She had no idea that someone had already decided what kind of person they believed she was. But she also did not know that the truth was stronger than any assumption. Because hidden behind that luxury vehicle was not a mystery. It was a story of dedication, success, and years of hard work. The answer was not complicated. The proof existed. It was simply waiting for someone to look beyond the first impression. And soon, the people who had judged the situation from a distance would have to face something they never expected. The truth was not going to match the story they had created. Sometimes, the moment when people seek answers is the same moment when they must confront the assumptions they created. In Willow Creek, Texas, Richard Caldwell had already convinced himself that something about the situation with the silver Rolls-Royce needed attention. He believed he was responding to a concern, but he never considered that his concern came from a story he had created without knowing the person involved. By the afternoon, Richard decided he needed someone else to look into the situation. He made a call to the local police department, explaining what he had seen. He described the luxury vehicle, the unfamiliar person beside it, and why he believed there was something unusual happening. But the details he shared were based on his interpretation, not on verified facts. Across town, Officer Daniel Brooks received the call and prepared to respond. He had handled many neighborhood situations before, and he understood that every report was only one side of a larger story. A call could provide information, but it could not provide the complete truth. The officer knew his responsibility was to listen, ask questions, and understand what was actually happening before making any conclusions. When Daniel arrived at the neighborhood, he saw Monica Hayes standing near the Rolls-Royce. She remained calm as the officer approached. She was not confused by the questions because she knew there was nothing complicated about the situation. She understood that the truth did not need anger or arguments. It only needed an opportunity to be seen. Richard walked over and explained his concerns again. He spoke with confidence because he believed the facts supported his view. He described what he thought had happened, but he still did not know the most important detail. He did not know Monica's story. Officer Daniel listened carefully to both sides. He did not immediately accept Richard's assumptions, and he did not dismiss his concerns without checking the facts. He simply focused on understanding the situation. Monica politely answered the questions and explained that the vehicle belonged to her. Her voice remained steady because she knew that a simple conversation could reveal what assumptions had hidden. The difference between Monica and Richard was not just the information they had. It was the way they approached uncertainty. Richard saw a question and filled the empty spaces with his own explanation. Monica saw a question and trusted that the truth would eventually provide the answer. The neighborhood became quiet as the conversation continued. Some residents watched from their windows, curious about how the situation would unfold. They had seen the beginning of the story, but they had not yet seen the complete picture. Officer Daniel understood that moments like this were important because a person's dignity could be affected by how others chose to respond. Before making any decision, he needed facts. Not guesses, not impressions. Facts. And the facts were about to reveal something that would change the way everyone viewed the situation. Because the person many people thought needed to explain herself was about to show that she had never been the person who needed to prove she belonged there. The truth had been waiting quietly from the beginning, and soon, everyone would finally see it. The most revealing moments are often the quiet ones, when the truth does not need to fight for attention because the facts are strong enough to speak for themselves. In the Willow Creek neighborhood of Texas, Officer Daniel Brooks stood beside the silver Rolls-Royce, carefully listening as two completely different perspectives surrounded the same situation. Richard Caldwell believed he had noticed something suspicious. Monica Hayes knew there was nothing suspicious at all. The difference between them was not the event itself. It was the meaning they had attached to it. Officer Daniel remained professional as he continued asking questions. He understood that his role was not to decide based on appearances. His role was to discover what actually happened. He looked at the situation carefully, knowing that every person involved deserved to be heard. Richard explained again why he had called. He talked about the vehicle, the neighborhood, and why he believed something was unusual. His voice carried certainty because he had already reached a conclusion before the conversation began. But Daniel noticed something important. Richard had many opinions but very few facts. Monica stood calmly nearby, allowing the conversation to continue. She did not interrupt. She did not try to make the moment more difficult than it needed to be. Instead, she answered each question respectfully. Her confidence did not come from trying to convince anyone that she belonged. It came from knowing the truth did not depend on someone else's approval. For Monica, this was not the first time she had experienced a situation where people judged what they saw before understanding what was behind it. Her career had taught her that details mattered. Assumptions could create confusion, but evidence could create clarity. She knew that the best way forward was not through frustration. It was through patience. As Daniel continued gathering information, the atmosphere changed. The neighbors watching from nearby windows became more interested. They had originally seen only a small part of the situation. They saw a luxury vehicle and a woman they did not recognize. But now they were beginning to understand that there was a much larger story behind what they had assumed. Richard slowly realized that the confidence he felt earlier was beginning to disappear. He had expected the conversation to confirm his concerns. Instead, every question seemed to reveal how much he did not know. He had never asked Monica about the vehicle. He had never learned about her background. He had never considered that the explanation could be completely different from the one he created. Officer Daniel then asked Monica if she had any documentation related to the vehicle. Monica calmly nodded. She explained that she had information that could clarify everything. She reached for the folder she had brought with her, knowing that the answer was not hidden. It was simply waiting to be seen. The moment before the folder opened felt longer than a few seconds. Richard watched carefully. The neighbors watched quietly, and Officer Daniel prepared to review the facts. Because sometimes the biggest turning points do not come from dramatic words or arguments. They come from a simple piece of evidence that changes the entire understanding of a situation. The truth was about to step forward, and when it did, everyone would have to reconsider the story they believed at the beginning. The truth does not always arrive with a loud announcement. Sometimes it appears quietly in a document, in a name, and in a moment when everyone realizes the story they believed was never the complete one. In the Willow Creek neighborhood of Texas, Officer Daniel Brooks carefully opened the folder Monica Hayes had provided. Richard Caldwell stood nearby, watching closely, still expecting the explanation to match the conclusion he had already created. But as Daniel reviewed the documents, the entire situation began to change. The first thing he noticed was clear. The ownership information connected the silver Rolls-Royce directly to Monica Hayes. Her name was listed on the official paperwork. There was no confusion. There was no missing information. The vehicle belonged to her. For several seconds, the driveway became completely quiet. The same people who had looked at the situation earlier with uncertainty were now looking at it with a different understanding. The question was no longer whether Monica had a reason to be there. The question became why so many people had assumed she did not. Richard looked at the documents and felt the weight of that realization. He had been certain that he understood what was happening, but he had never actually known the full story. He had seen a vehicle before he saw a person. He had noticed an object before recognizing the individual standing beside it. Monica did not react with anger or satisfaction. She simply remained calm. She understood that the document proved ownership of the vehicle, but it also revealed something much deeper. The moment showed how quickly people can create conclusions when they only see a small part of someone's life. Officer Daniel handed the documents back respectfully and acknowledged that the situation had been misunderstood. He appreciated the way Monica handled the entire conversation. She had allowed the process to happen without turning the moment into a confrontation. She trusted that the facts would eventually speak for themselves. Richard struggled to find the right words. Earlier, he believed he was protecting his neighborhood. Now he understood that protecting a community also meant making sure people were treated fairly. A person could not be understood through a single glance or a single assumption. The neighbors watching from nearby homes also began to reflect on what they had witnessed. The Rolls-Royce had attracted attention because of its value, but the real lesson had nothing to do with the vehicle. The real lesson was about the person standing beside it. Monica had not needed the car to prove anything about herself. Her success existed long before anyone saw the vehicle. Her character existed before anyone knew her name. The paperwork only confirmed one simple fact. She was exactly where she belonged. As the afternoon continued, the driveway slowly returned to normal. But the understanding created by that moment remained. Richard had learned that confidence without curiosity could lead people in the wrong direction. Officer Daniel had been reminded that fairness begins with listening. And the neighbors had seen how quickly assumptions can disappear when the truth finally arrives. The document had answered the question about ownership. But the deeper answer was about something much more important: the value of seeing people for who they truly are before deciding who they should be. The truth had finally been revealed, but the most important part of the moment was not the document inside Monica Hayes's folder. It was the realization that came after everyone understood what had happened. In the Willow Creek neighborhood of Texas, the silver Rolls-Royce was no longer the center of attention. The focus had shifted to something much deeper. It was about how quickly people could form opinions about someone they had never taken the time to know. Richard Caldwell stood quietly, thinking about the events that had unfolded. Earlier that day, he believed he was simply responding to something unusual. He believed he was doing the responsible thing by asking questions. But now he had to confront a difficult truth. The biggest mistake was not making a call. The biggest mistake was believing he already knew the answer before searching for the facts. Richard thought back to the first moment he saw Monica beside the vehicle. He remembered how quickly his mind created a story. He remembered how little information he actually had. A stranger, a luxury car, a situation that looked different from what he expected. That was all it took for him to create a conclusion. But now he understood that a person's life could never be measured by a few seconds of observation. Monica remained calm throughout the entire situation. She did not use the moment to embarrass Richard or make him feel small. She understood something important. A person's dignity does not come from proving others wrong. It comes from knowing who they are, even when others do not see it yet. She had built her career through years of discipline and commitment. She had earned her success long before anyone noticed the vehicle parked beside her. The Rolls-Royce was only one small part of her story. It was never the definition of it. Officer Daniel Brooks also reflected on the encounter after leaving the neighborhood. The situation reminded him why careful listening mattered. A report could describe a situation, but it could never fully describe the people involved. He understood that fairness required more than simply arriving at a scene. It required patience, respect, and the willingness to discover the truth before making decisions. The neighbors who watched the interaction from their homes also carried a different perspective afterward. They had seen how a simple assumption could create an entire story that was not based on reality. They had seen how quickly that story disappeared once the facts were presented. Richard eventually realized that being part of a community meant more than protecting what was familiar. It meant making space for understanding. It meant recognizing that people could have achievements, responsibilities, and experiences that were invisible from the outside. Monica never needed anyone's permission to belong. She already belonged because she had earned her place through her own journey. The moment simply revealed something that had always been true. As the neighborhood returned to its normal rhythm, one lesson remained clear. The truth does not become valuable because people finally accept it. The truth has value from the beginning. Sometimes the only thing that changes is whether people are willing to see it. The most meaningful changes often happen after the moment everyone expects the story to end. In Willow Creek, Texas. The truth about the silver Rolls-Royce had already been revealed, but the lesson behind that moment continued to stay with the people who witnessed it. The driveway was quiet again. The neighbors returned to their daily routines, and Monica Hayes continued moving forward with her life. But for Richard Caldwell, that morning became something he could not simply forget. He kept thinking about how quickly he had formed an opinion without knowing the person standing in front of him. He realized that the most important thing he had lost in that moment was not being correct. It was the opportunity to understand someone before judging them. Richard had always believed that experience helped him recognize situations quickly. He believed that years of living in the same neighborhood gave him good instincts. But now he understood that instincts without curiosity could become assumptions. He learned that knowing a place did not mean knowing every person who lived there. Everyone carried a story that could not be seen from the outside. Monica never expected the situation to become a lesson for others. She did not see herself as someone who needed to prove anything. Her life had already been shaped by years of hard work, education, and dedication. The Rolls-Royce was only a small part of her journey. It represented something she had achieved, but it did not represent everything she was. Monica understood that objects could attract attention, but character was revealed through actions. The way she handled the situation showed the values she had carried throughout her life. She chose patience when others expected conflict. She chose respect when others had already made assumptions. Officer Daniel Brooks also carried the experience with him. The encounter reminded him that every person involved in a situation deserved to be seen as a complete human being. He understood that his responsibility was not only to answer questions but also to make sure the process remained fair. A person could not be understood through a single observation or a quick conclusion. Real understanding required time, listening, and an honest search for facts. The story quietly changed the way some neighbors viewed the world around them. They began to recognize how easily a person could be misunderstood when others only noticed one detail about their life. They saw that a luxury vehicle, a home, or any possession could never explain the full story of a person. Richard eventually had an honest conversation with himself about what happened. He understood that making a mistake was not the end of the story. The important part was what someone chose to learn from that mistake. He did not need to create excuses for his actions. He needed to recognize the lesson and carry it forward. Monica continued her journey with the same confidence she had shown from the beginning. She never needed approval from strangers to know her own worth. The truth had always been there. The only thing that changed was that others finally took the time to see it. And in the end, the neighborhood learned a lesson that reached far beyond one vehicle or one misunderstanding. A person's story is always deeper than the first thing others notice. The greatest fairness begins when people choose to understand before they choose to judge. The truth had changed the way people in Willow Creek looked at the situation, but the most important change was happening quietly inside the people who had witnessed it. The silver Rolls-Royce was no longer remembered as the center of the story. It became a symbol of something much deeper. It represented the danger of judging a person before understanding their journey. For Richard Caldwell, the experience became a reminder that every person carries a story that may never be visible at first glance. In the weeks after the encounter, Richard found himself noticing moments he once ignored. He paid more attention to the way people were treated, the assumptions people made, and the importance of asking questions before creating conclusions. He realized that the hardest lessons are sometimes the ones that challenge the way people see themselves. Richard had always considered himself a fair person. He believed he respected others and understood his community. But the experience with Monica Hayes showed him that fairness was not only about what someone believed about themselves. It was about how they acted when they faced a situation they did not fully understand. Monica continued focusing on the life she had built. She returned to her work as a corporate attorney, continued helping her clients, and continued living with the same confidence she had shown that morning. She never wanted the situation to become a story about proving someone wrong. Instead, she hoped it would become a reminder that people should be given the chance to be understood. Monica knew that one difficult moment did not define Richard, just as one assumption did not define her. What mattered was whether people were willing to learn and grow afterward. Officer Daniel Brooks also reflected on what happened. The encounter reinforced a lesson he had learned throughout his career. Every person who stands in front of him has a story beyond the immediate situation. A call may begin with a question, but the answer requires patience and attention. Daniel understood that fairness was not only about discovering facts. It was also about creating an environment where the truth could be heard. The neighborhood slowly began to change after that day. Conversations that once focused on the vehicle shifted toward conversations about understanding and respect. People started thinking about how often they judged situations based on limited information. They began recognizing that success, struggle, and personal history are not always visible from the outside. Richard eventually understood that the moment had given him something valuable. It had given him the opportunity to become more aware of his own reactions. He learned that admitting a mistake did not make someone weaker. It showed the ability to grow. Monica's response remained one of the strongest parts of the story. She had every reason to feel hurt, but she chose dignity. She had every reason to focus on the judgment she faced, but she focused on the lesson that could come from it. That choice was what made the moment meaningful. In the end, Willow Creek remembered more than a misunderstanding involving a luxury vehicle. The community remembered a lesson about humanity. People are not defined by what others assume when they first see them. They are defined by their character, their actions, and the truth of who they are. Sometimes the greatest change begins when someone takes a moment to look again and realize there was always more to the story. Some stories are remembered because of the events that happened. Others are remembered because of the way those events changed the people involved. In Willow Creek, Texas, the moment surrounding Monica Hayes, Richard Caldwell, and the silver Rolls-Royce became a reminder that truth is not only about proving a fact. It is about understanding the people behind the facts. Long after that morning ended, the lesson continued to stay with everyone who witnessed it. The vehicle that had once created questions became a symbol of something much more important. It represented the importance of looking beyond appearances and recognizing that every person has a story that cannot be discovered through a single glance. Richard Caldwell often thought about the moment he first saw Monica beside the vehicle. He remembered how quickly he believed he understood the situation. He remembered how certain he felt before he had asked even one question. But with time, he realized that certainty was not always the same as truth. Sometimes, the strongest confidence comes from the willingness to admit there is more to learn. Richard did not erase what happened. Instead, he allowed it to become a lesson that changed the way he approached others. He began to understand that respect should come before assumptions. Monica Hayes continued her life with the same determination and confidence she had always carried. She never allowed one moment of misunderstanding to define her. She knew that her achievements, her values, and her character existed beyond anyone's first impression. The situation had shown something she already understood. People can sometimes judge what they see before discovering what is real. But she also believed that moments like this could become opportunities for people to grow. Officer Daniel Brooks continued serving Willow Creek with a deeper appreciation for the importance of patience and understanding. He remembered how easily a situation could appear simple from one perspective and completely different after hearing the full story. He knew that fairness required more than following a process. It required seeing people as individuals and giving the truth room to appear. The neighborhood also carried the memory of that day. The conversations changed. The way people viewed similar situations changed. Instead of focusing only on what they saw on the surface, some began asking themselves what they might not know. They learned that a person's possessions, appearance, or circumstances could never explain the complete story of their life. The greatest lesson was not about a luxury vehicle. It was about human dignity. Monica never needed the Rolls-Royce to prove that she belonged. She belonged because of who she was, not because of what she owned. The documents confirmed ownership, but her character had already been clear through the way she handled the situation. In the end, the truth did not change because people finally accepted it. The truth was always there. What changed was the willingness of others to see it. Willow Creek remembered that day not because of a car or a misunderstanding, but because it revealed something deeper. People are often carrying stories that others cannot see. And the only way to discover those stories is to replace quick judgments with curiosity, replace assumptions with understanding, and choose to see the person before the circumstances surrounding them.